So today we're going to be discussing if there ever will be a World War IV. Now, I know I'm kind of jumping the gun a little bit and completely skipping over World War III, but I've done like maybe 10 World War III scenarios on this channel. So let's talk about World War IV. Now, this is completely assuming that humanity survives World War III. You know, nuclear bombs, not a fun thing. And if they're used, then that most likely means humanity goes extinct, except for that one rich dude who just shoots himself into space. Might be Elon Musk. But yeah, we're going to be going over two different scenarios here. One where nukes aren't used and one where nukes are used. So if you guys do enjoy today's video, make sure to show some support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel if you're new. All of the support is greatly appreciated, as the channel is going through some meh times right now. Not bad, not good, so you know, just meh. But if we can get back into those good times, that would be amazing. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump right into this scenario. So World War III is where we're going to be starting, or I guess ending. And our first scenario is if nukes are used. Now, if nukes are used, then we're going to assume that all nuclear powers are using them. So the United States, Great Britain, France, Russia, China, India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel. There's another one that I'm forgetting. Maybe you guys, you might have some. But if these countries all use their nukes, we're going to assume humanity is essentially wiped off the face of the earth, and that's most likely what would happen. But say that some do survive, obviously it's not going to be able to be habitable for a little bit in terms of earth, so they're gonna have to wait underground or in space for a couple of years until that radiation starts to go away. But even then, radiation doesn't go away for a long time. So yeah, let's skip ahead a couple, like maybe a century, and all the radiation is gone and humanity can come back to Earth, or I guess come up from underground if they manage to survive that long. Or maybe we're living on Mars, who knows. But I'm assuming that the place that they'd want to start to repopulate first is Europe, because Europe is essentially, like, I don't want to say the most important continent in history, because I wouldn't be biased because I'm over here, but it's responsible for a lot of stuff, lots of wars, you know, the plague, which technically came from Asia, but it killed a lot of Europeans, colonizing the New World, colonizing the Old World, or maybe Africa. Nope, Africa probably isn't great because of resources. So Europe, let's just say Europe is where they'd want to go. Let's just say Central Europe, because that's a good starting point. They'd probably land somewhere in Germany or Poland. That is a perfect circle. I just drew that. Are you proud of me, guys? Because I'm proud of myself. And from there, humanity would probably slowly start to repopulate the world. Very slowly. Everyone's related, by the way. That's kind of freaky. But essentially moving out from Germany and just going where they can. Now, the British Channel, that isn't too far or too hard to get across, so that, you know, it's possible. Same thing with over here in Iberia and Morocco. Gibraltar isn't too far away from Africa. So the repopulation process would look something like this, moving down into these more resource heavy areas. I don't know if those resources have been evaporated or disintegrated, or even if there's still any signs of nature in the world, but you know, we can have hope. So yeah, humanity would be able to, I don't know, okay, the Philippines accidentally got covered in here, so just ignore that. But they'd probably go down here to the Strait of Malacca, then stop off there, and instead, you know, they'd start to regrow around the coastal areas of Africa, avoiding the Sahara for the most part, but you know, going along the coast. Madagascar would probably be not populated for a few years. Notice I am leaving some of the harder to get to regions off, so like Siberia, you'd have to swim to get here, so you're not going there. And yeah, also with nuclear bombs comes coldness and nuclear winter, and depending on when humanity resurfaces, they could be able to get across the Bering Strait over to Alaska, because that happens when there's ice ages. So let's go ahead and assume that they do, and they manage to make ground in Alaska, moving down the Pacific coast into the California area and down into Mexico. So yeah, at this point, humanity's history is essentially being rewritten. As you know, when humanity first came about through evolution, they first surfaced in Africa and moved out from Africa. In this case, they're resurfacing or coming into Europe from outer space and expanding out from there. So maybe there'd be like two histories, the original history and the sequel, but that's just a theory because this is World War IV. That's very far away. But yeah, eventually North America, a very habitable place, and I'm sure humanity would make its way across the United States into southern Canada, up into Quebec area, and you know, screw it, why not swim to Cuba, down into South America, mostly avoiding that jungly area, but you know, going around the entire coast because coastal areas are nice. And I'm sure boats would not be far along, because this is still the same humanity that was as intelligent as it once was, except resource wise they're not going as well as they once were. So we're going to assume this is what they're going to look like after the first expansion. This could be called the second expansion, and from the second expansion we get the third expansion, which is going to include the colonization of Oceania, the conquering of the rest of the Amazon, the conquering of northern Canada and all of the cold areas up here. The Sahara gets captured, and so does Siberia. So I guess the cool thing about these white lines is you can kind of see the different phases. So phase one, if you remember, Obviously you remember because you were watching this video, but that was like where the most of the world is. And then within these lines outside of the glowy parts, so like on the inner part, if that's making any sense, that's called a second phase. So in this case, this would be the third phase, because if you remember, that was the third phase. This in the inner area will be the third phase, and this will be the second phase, blah 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 blah. Okay, anyway, how about the part where nukes aren't involved? Okay, nukes weren't involved, and World War III played out, and the United States and its allies are victorious. That's the most likely scenario here. Now, I'm not going to draw up new borders here because I simply don't feel like it right now. It's 10 o'clock. I'm tired. I'm also hungry. But yeah, naps. So what would World War IV look like? So let's go ahead and draw up some factions real quick. All right, looking at this first faction here, we have what would essentially be the New World Order, throwback to the Alternative Future series. And speaking of the Alternative Future series, once again, I will be getting that out in the summer. So in the next 2 weeks ish, I'll get the trailer out, and then I'll actually have the first episode out. We'll premiere that similar to how we premiered the final episode of the first season. But yeah, I want to get that trailer out because the trailer is going to have a lot of implications for the series. So, you know, big things need to have trailers. Anyway, this is the Western world, as you can see here. Of course, this is not this wasn't like the war alliance. This is going to have some countries that were in the aftermath of the peace treaty. So Belarus, for example, would be turned democratic and over to the blue team. Same thing with Serbia. And of course, there's also going to be countries that didn't stay in this alliance. So like India would have been on the blue team, but they didn't choose to join this because it doesn't suit their ideology. Now on the red team here, we're going to have the countries that just lost this World War III. It's going to include Russia. It's going to include China, Pakistan, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. Now these guys may not exist because of Turkey, but we're going to ignore that for now because remember I said I'm not redrawing borders. Also Central Asia and Mongolia, North Korea if it still exists, and big portions of Southeast Asia. Now I do want to say something real quick. My videos are obviously unrealistic most of the time. That's because, you know, I want to make a more entertaining scenario as opposed to a more realistic scenario. In a world where the Western alliances win, we're not likely to see many border changes. And that's because typically what Western democracies do is they just install new governments into places. So like when the US invaded Iraq, they just installed a new government. There weren't necessarily too many border changes. I mean, the US did occupy them for a few years, but nonetheless, the borders did not change over here in Iraq. The US didn't steal anything from it, or Turkey didn't get anything from it. So it is important to note that Western democracies tend to not steal land, whereas, you know, the Eastern democracies, they're not democracies. The Eastern guys, they tend to not install governments, instead just take land and then, you know, rebellion, rigged election, Soviet Union. But this is what we're going to be calling the Pact of Asia. It's the remainder of the countries that survived. Of course, they're all crippled from losing the war, but then again, the Western countries are also crippled from losing the war. And at this point, a new alliance is going to show up, and this is a pretty big one. It's the African Union Alliance. Of course, Africa, if you know, it's very interesting in real life politics. It is divided and united. So the African Union does exist. It's a giant economical alliance. It's not military, at least I don't think it is. But there's also the Arab League. I think that's what it's called. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But yeah, this area has big alliances in it. And if theoretically in the future, it wouldn't be too unlikely if the African nations united into one. It would be good for them economically and military wise. And of course, it would help them develop better. But then again, Africa is also a very diverse area with different cultures and languages and different histories. Thank Europe for that. So then again, it doesn't make too much sense for it to be united. But this is post World War III, so we're talking like 2070 maybe, and we're looking at World War IV. So this is possible, of course, because it's in the future, the alternative future, or maybe it is the future. Maybe I'm just a genius. But with this big pact rising up, I'm going to assume that they aren't going to choose a side between red and blue, but instead might have a civil war over it, and instead, you know, have two different factions break out, which go to their own individual sides. And that's if the red team and the blue team go to war again. Now, since this is so far in the future, it's hard to tell like what different countries will be like, because, you know, a country like France could go from blue team to red team real quickly. We've seen that happen before in history. Same thing with Poland, although they were kind of forced into that. Turkey flips back and forth a lot, especially recently. But yeah, in the future, past World War III, World War IV, it's either going to be nobody exists or everyone exists, and there's a lot of alliances. Another alliance that is very likely to happen if this kind of thing happens is the Latin American League. This is basically just every Spanish-speaking country, minus Haiti, and minus Belize, and minus the Bahamas, and some others, like these guys. It's all of them united together under one alliance, which is basically just a neutral alliance saying, hey, screw off USA, screw off Brazil, and leave us alone. Don't tread on us. Brazil, I colored them purple just so I could do the recolor thing for all the other countries, but they could form an alliance with a bunch of other countries like South Africa, and India, who also just happen to be BRICS members. Maybe Saudi Arabia gets in on that, maybe Morocco gets on that, maybe Indonesia gets in on that. But this could be like a defensive organization, it could be an economical organization. All I'm saying is that there's a lot of countries here that can link up with each other in many different ways. There's also a lot of unions that could take place, such as the USA and Canada, or a forceful union between Sudan and South Sudan, or a European Union taking place, an Arab Union taking place. There's a ton of possibilities for this world, but this is going to be my shot at a World War IV alliance map. Once again, we are skipping World War III, so anything could happen from that, like the first scenario where humanity got wiped out, or the second scenario which leads us here. So in the comments, I want you to leave your prediction for World War IV. We will not be alive to witness that, hopefully, but you know, it's good to predict, because sometimes your predictions come true and everyone sees you as a god. Not me though, because my predictions have never came true, except for that one time with the Ukraine war. I was one day off. Technically, not even a day, like 12 hours off. And if you get rid of time zones, I was right on the dot. Anyway, thank you guys for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, make sure to leave a like and support this channel by subscribing. Once again, leave your input in the comments, leave your ideas in the comments. They're good enough. That's right, I'm challenging you to leave a good idea, because your ideas are horrible, horrendous. You know what? Take those ideas, throw them out the window. Just kidding. They're not bad. In fact, I use some of them, but I don't give you credit because yeah. Anyway, goodbye. And of course, thank you to all the super fans. This includes Patrick Clauser, Yo Moma Moma, Texan Cowboy Cheese, Kylie Speaks Plays, Poland Country Ball, Dimitri, DW Cool Dude, Nevada Garbage Trucks, Yakko, Soviet Ball, and Serminator. Once again, thank you guys.